Thank you for listening to this Podcast One production. Now available on Apple Podcasts, Podcast One, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
The following episode of Killer Genes contains graphic and sensitive information and material. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to Killer Genes Stripped Down, where we talk about everything true crime and then some.
You'll hear about the cases that are close to us and go behind the scenes of true crime reporting.
We'll also talk about case updates and breaking news, as well as speak with some of our friends and colleagues in the world of true crime.
Now, we're going to be sharing things we've never been able to talk about because certainly inappropriate to post online, but this is the platform that we can finally share it, what really happens when gathering true crime stories.
So, let's get to it.
Joining us now on a special episode of Stripped Down is a good friend who I've known for a long time, Deputy Chief Blake Chow, and he's been with the LAPD for 30 years. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Melissa.
Does it feel like 30 years?
No, it feels like 2 weeks. It has gone by so fast, and I think I'm blessed because I really enjoy what I do.
So when we met... Wait, we have to tell everyone, Kelly's going to sound a little funky. She's been struck down by a child with influenza.
I have. Yep. Sorry, everybody. My usual voice is not here today. So it's still me, just so everybody knows. So Chief Chow, thank you so much for joining us.
It's just too good. It's too good. You actually sound like a little girl when you're sick, which is odd. It's the levels go so high. Mine goes deeper man voice. Blake and I met. I was a CBS correspondent here for SoCal, and I'm pretty sure when we met, you were working the bomb squad, right?
I was in our Counterterrorism Special Operations Bureau, which included our bomb squad and our major crimes division, which is kind of our anti-terrorist piece, as well as SWAT and K9 and all that cool stuff.
One of the things I'd like to know, if that's okay, is really what sparked your interest in going into the field of law enforcement? You know, everybody kind of said always as a kid, I wanted to be a fireman or I wanted to be a police officer. You know, was this always your goal in life, and why that passion?
You know what it was? I remember being around 16 and all of a sudden having an interest in it. You know, I would do reading on it. I did a couple I lived up in the Bay Area at the time. And I did some ride-alongs with the Santa Clara County Sheriff. And then I graduated from high school, and my parents didn't want me to go into law enforcement because they had started watching cops, and they figured I would be in foot pursuits every night and in fights and things like that. So they said, you're not going to major in criminal justice and be a cop. You can. So I decided, okay, well, I went to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and I did what I think they wanted me to do. I majored in business. I graduated, and my first job, I was an internal auditor at a defense contractor. It was a year and a half that felt like 10 years. And I moved back up to the Bay Area, and I was a staff accountant for a medical manufacturing firm. Same thing. I didn't get much satisfaction out of those jobs, but I still had that interest that was kind of, parked in the back of my mind. So I joined the San Jose Police Reserves, and I started doing that and enjoying that more than what I was getting paid for. So that, to me, being, 20-something is a clue that it might be a good time to make a career change.
What were your first impressions when joining the LAPD, and how was it then versus now?
It was definitely an eye-opener. I wasn't from Los Angeles. Of course, I'd seen the movie Colors, and I figured that's kind of how LA was like. Little did I know that it was I made it through the academy and got out in the street. LA was, in the early 90s, which was a much more violent place to work than it is right now. I think, back in the mid to late 90s, our homicides in Los Angeles were up in probably at least north of 1,000 per year. And, now we're probably down in the 300s or so. But the biggest thing for me, I think, is that our relationship with the community back in the early 90s, very, very strained. And, of course, I didn't know that when I was going to the academy, because that's not something you pick up until you hit the field. But our training back then was a lot of tactics and things like that didn't really have anything. It was designed to keep us safe, obviously, because of the violence. But we didn't have a lot of training that would really give us a way to connect with the community, which is, I think, what we're really good at right now.
And why was it because of gang domination back in the 90s that you guys have worked so hard to not weed out, but just really target better? Or what was the reason for the murder rates being so high then versus now?
I think there's a couple things. Crack cocaine had kind of made its introduction into society probably like the early to mid 80s. And that was really a vehicle to get drugs on the street. And a lot of the gangs found it was very lucrative to go into the crack cocaine business. And so you had a lot of turf wars going on over geography as well as business. The gangs at that time, because of that, a lot of money came into it, they became stronger, they had more firepower. And there was just a lot of shootings and turf war things going on that we saw throughout the city. I worked Rampart Division as a training officer in the mid 90s, and we had in 8 little square miles back then. We had 150 homicides one year, and I remember coming in and there were just 2 or 3 shootings a night. And I don't even know how the homicide teams kept up with that pace, but a lot of the shootings back then were done with assault weapons, AK-47s, between certain gangs. But I think a lot of it was kind of new, and I think that the introduction of crack cocaine certainly played a huge role in that.
Recently, actually, I went on a ride along for something I wanted to do with the LAPD, and I just remember it was just me and one other officer, no other cars. And we were driving through South LA, and we just see a sea of red. And he said, "Oh, let's go check that out." And I said, No. Let's not do that. And he's like, "We'll be fine. They're not going to shoot us. We'll be fine." And I just was like, "Oh, I'm done. I'm done." We went through this sea of red, which, I'm indicating, I don't know if there were Bloods or what, but they were a gang, and they were mourning the murder of one of their own, and they're memorializing in this street area. And we were just slowly driving through, like I'd say 200 people all in red, just staring at us. And I thought, this can go one of 2 ways. I was terrified. And I want to ask you questions that people normally don't get to ask. Are you ever scared? And what do you do?
In my experience, it's strange, when I'm working or when I was working the streets, I was never scared. I always felt like I had a partner that was trained as well as I was. We have radios, we could request a backup or help if something happened. And I always felt that my training would keep me safe, so I was never scared. But I remember being in some significant tactical situations where you just kind of, your mind goes into this police mode, and we use our training. We know all the officers know exactly what they need to do. Other officers show up, they're in the same boat, and we get the job done. And then sometimes when it's over, you sit back and you take a breath and you go, what the heck did I just do? I came across yesterday, even to this day, even though I don't work the field, I came across a traffic accident in downtown Los Angeles, and this 25-year-old woman was riding one of the scooters, and a car hit her and launched her over the parked cars, and she landed on the sidewalk. Probably flew, probably a good 15, 20 feet, and it was a stolen car, so the guy that was driving it took off. But there was no ambulance there yet. There was no police car yet. There was just me. I got flagged down, and they said, "Hurry! She's not breathing, or she's having trouble breathing." And I remember I got out of the car, and I just calmly went over there. She was sitting up against the wall. she was bleeding so much, the blood was pooling in the sidewalk and was running off into the street. Her jaw was broken clearly. She had a hole inside of her cheek. And, I did what I'm trained to do. I requested an ambulance or requested additional units. I gave kind of a little synopsis to our RTO about that she was breathing and she was conscious, but you could tell that she was, she could go into shock. And all I did was I knelt down beside her and I put my hand on her knee and I told her, I'm not going anywhere. I requested an ambulance and you're going to be okay. And I told her that over and over and over. And every time I said, you're going to be okay, she nodded her head. And, I sometimes think that possibly, being able to do that with her maybe kept her from going into shock or kept her breathing, because clearly the people that flagged me down said she was having trouble breathing. And then she was transported, and I found out later on, although she has significant injuries, she was in stable condition. So your training kind of just kicks in and you do what you have to do. And I went back to the office and I go, man, that was an experience.
Speaking of that, Chief Chow, with law enforcement's relationship with the community seems to have taken a shift over the last few years. And you being such a veteran of the force, and especially in Los Angeles, how have you personally seen that shift, and what do you make of it?
Well, when I first came on and I was a young police officer, we didn't have a relationship with the community. I remember being trained that, and you have to remember too, you have to put it in context. Back in the 80s and the late 70s, there were a lot of attacks on police officers. People were planting bombs in the police cars. I remember we were probably losing at least an officer a year to violence somehow. And it was just kind of a known fact. And, we were being introduced to a world of, significant amount of shootings every night and gangs and things like that. So there was a lot of violence. So we were trained to not really trust anybody. We had to do our job, but you don't let suspects, victims, witnesses, I don't care who they are, nobody approaches you. And then some of the response to those violent times was a lot of task forces that went into neighborhoods that really kind of was almost like an occupying force and, high on arrests and things like that. You've probably heard of some of the task forces that were going on back in the early 90s or the late 80s. And so what happened was we didn't really have, although we had there were individual officers, senior lead officers and things like that had good relationships with community members. As a whole, the organization's culture didn't have a way to create a good relationship with the community. And so you can't create public safety in an environment like that. You can't go into neighborhoods and become occupying forces and stop everybody because, you stop people that live in the neighborhood, and you can't arrest everybody. You can't arrest your way out of a narcotics problem. You can't arrest your way out of anything. It requires this, work with this community. So I think probably the watershed moment for us was obviously the 1992 riots. And if you look back at the riots, a lot of people say, well, they were the Rodney King riots. No, that may have been the fuse that lit the powder keg, but the powder keg had been being packed with gunpowder for with explosives for many years. And 92 was just something just set it off, and that's what we had. So ever since over the last 8 years or so, LAPD has really been working very hard and kind of in the forefront of actually building some meaningful relationships with the community. And I think that's what you're seeing right now.
It's so interesting because, first of all, I had no idea it was that violent and that dangerous for officers at that time. And it's scary listening to it. But I did see as a, field reporter of many, many years that there was a shift in, crime rates lowered and the relationships got better, especially within the community. But then recently I see it shifted again nationwide. And I wonder, would it be because of the targeted police shootings? Would it be because of all the cameras and the, community kind of turning the eye and, self-policing and trying to expose, cops in the way they handle things? Because, what's a little frustrating being a crime reporter is, I'm obviously friends with a lot of officers, and I think everyone knows at this point my brother is a former criminal. It was in a gang. I mean, he was just shot a few weeks ago. And so, I see I'm in that weird world where I kind of see the criminals and I see the officers, and I have perspectives from both. And what's frustrating is I see people posting videos like, exchanges with officers on an incident where they're provoking them. And it's like they're trying to look at the way he's treating me and what he just said to me. And it's like, you're at a homicide and you're videotaping an officer's, words and behaviors because he's clearly outnumbered. And it's very frustrating that the narrative, it's not fair. And I do understand there are these huge incidents that are really important to talk about. But what is the reason for the current shift where it's kind of going back to the 90s that you described?
Well, I think, first of all, from a police officer's perspective, I mean, the individual that hates a bad cop the most is a good cop, because it takes one person to tarnish many, many years of work that are done by a lot of people. The change, we have seen spike in violent crime in Los Angeles probably in the last year or so. And it's really kind of hard to describe what it is. We're not anywhere close to where we were in the 90s as far as statistically wise. And because I think in 97, I think we're maybe up around 1,200 homicides. And if you add the county in there, it's well into in the thousands. And we're not anywhere close to that. But, when I see what you're describing, Melissa, I think there's like many, many factors that are impacting that. And it's not just a one thing that I think has impacted this. I think social media has played a very, very big role, not only in some of the things that you described, but if you look at, some of the division that's going on, for example, with, Asian hate crime and, Asians being blamed for COVID, when COVID came over and started spreading throughout the United States, or you look at other political things that have happened in the last year. Social media has become a vehicle, I think, that spreads messages very much, much more quickly than what would happen in the 1990s. And I think there's also, because of social media and because you can post things on, you see a lot more stories of people confronting officers that are posted and other people watch it. And it does happen quite a bit. It makes the officer's job very tough. And I also think possibly there's, if you look at the homeless issues that we're having, that also leads to violent crime. As a society, we've failed our people that have mental mental health crisis that are in the street. Or if you look at addiction, people that are living in the street that are addicted to either different substances or alcohol, we've failed them in being able to provide them with a safe place and that could actually provide a recovery environment. And so there's many, many things I think that have happened, in the last several years that have created possibly this environment that we're in right now. Ghost guns have become a huge problem. I would say that probably half the guns that I see confiscated are ghost guns that are these kits that you can buy in other states that are not put together. They don't have serial numbers. They're legal to sell in those states, but you can come back to California, you can put it together, and you have a gun in a few minutes.
Oh, it's a real gun? Ghost guns? They're real?
Gun, yeah. They sell them as kits, and so they're not technically firearms, but you can bring them, you can buy them in different states. What states? It's the states that sell them is escaping me right now. But there's some that are close to California, and you can bring them home. You can put them together, and you have a full functioning firearm. Probably in like 30 minutes. But they're illegal here. They're illegal. They don't have serial numbers. So, we have Westboro's got a ATF task force where we are pulling those ghost guns off the street in just record numbers.
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp Online Therapy. And if you haven't heard of or tried BetterHelp yet, you really should give it a shot.
You know, Kelly, the public's perception of mental health has really changed over the years. And thankfully, I think we're all beginning to understand that our mental health is just as important as our physical health.
Yeah. And, I go to the doctors every year for a physical. I get the oil changed in my car regularly. I do the deep spring cleaning. And I go to the dentist, even though I hate it. So we really need to treat our mental health as being just of an important regular maintenance routine as anything else in our daily lives.
Yeah, it's important to stay centered and balanced, And what makes BetterHelp so easy is that it's customized online therapy that offers video, phone, and even live chat sessions with a therapist. So you don't have to see anyone on camera if you don't want to.
And you know what? It's much more affordable than in-person therapy. And you can start communicating with your therapist in under 48 hours. So why invest in everything else and not on your mind?
This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp, and Killer Genes listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/killergenes.
That's BETTERHELP.com/killergenes.
I wanted to go back to the roles that police officers probably didn't realize they would have to, wear these titles. But, there's a lot of calls coming in from homeless individuals, mentally ill individuals, or addicts living on the street that turn violent, right? There's a spike, especially in certain areas like Venice Beach. You want to address the attack and the violence portion of it, but there's a very real thing about a mentally ill person. How do you find that you now have to have training to be, in a sense, like a social worker, to identify an illness and to approach in a different way? And how dominant is that issue, those calls of violence where it's mental illness is related?
Oh, it's significant. We've had, like I said, the treatment options for people that, for example, that maybe don't have health insurance is really almost, it's not very effective. And so they end up on the street. But you're right, the officer's job, probably starting in the mid-90s, has evolved into not just something of an individual that's there to enforce the laws. They have to be social workers. They have to be mental health crisis negotiators. They have to be, marriage counselors. They have to be, juvenile counselors. I mean, you name it. That's, if you do a ride along and you handle enough radio calls, you realize they do all those jobs in a single night, depending upon who they come in contact with. So the training's there, but, I think what's happened in the past is because of some of the things that I described earlier, the police officers are really the only person that is in the street 24/7. And a lot of these functions that are probably better suited, for counselors and things, addiction counselors, mental health crisis counselors, are probably more better equipped to handle it, are pushed off on police officers. And sometimes we're not the best people to be placed in that situation. Certainly, if violence is or a crime is occurring, yes, that's our wheelhouse. But some of the routine things that the police officers have to handle really should be, in a perfect world, better served by somebody that is a counselor or something like that.
Maybe like a crisis unit, I don't know. I mean, is there an answer? Are cities discussing it? Is it a different task force? How do you wrap your hands around it?
Well, there are some, the city of LA and the LAPD's got a program going that is doing just that. But some of the routine calls that are coming in involving people with mental health crisis, not involving a crime or violence, will actually go to a counselor. And because, as I said before, they're better equipped to handle that. Sometimes people in mental distress, and they maybe like a situation where a counselor would be better. sometimes if you come in a uniform, it makes the crisis worse, and it amps it up. And then, you might, maybe you end up having use of force. So there are programs that are kind of just getting off the ground that are designed kind of under that model, because I think people are realizing, police officers, we have a lot of work to do out there, and sometimes it's not best to tie up a police officer on some of these nonviolent calls that could be handled with a counselor and probably have a better outcome in the end.
Chief Chow, I want to ask you, you told a great story with the woman in the scooter. And over your 30 years, I mean, you've been through it all. Is there any particular incident or call that has stood out to you the most, for whatever reason that is? One that's never left you in all these years?
It's very similar to the one I just spoke of, because the calls where I felt like I actually saved somebody's life were the ones that really stand out to me. It's not the, of course I remember some of the tactical things that I got involved with, but it's really the ones where I was able to save somebody's life. And when I was probably the mid 90s, I was working Rampart, and I remember getting a welfare check, and that's usually because somebody elderly lives in a house. Nobody's heard from them in a while. And my partner and I go to this call, and we go in, and it's the middle of summer, and there's this elderly woman has like just probably 10 fans going because she didn't have air conditioning. And we're calling her name, and she lives in like a 2-story house. And I was really fully expecting to go up there and find her deceased, because that's usually how those things end up. And I remember I went up there to the bathroom, and she had slipped off the toilet, and her head was stuck between the bathtub and the toilet. And I thought she'd passed away. So I bent down, and, I put my hand on her, and she took a breath. And I told partner she's still alive. So we got an ambulance and transported her. And I went back to the station. I remember the lieutenant at the time, he told me, Blake, not a lot of people can actually point to a day and time that they saved somebody's life, but you guys can. And those are the things that always really stick out in my mind when I think back to some of the things that I've been involved in.
You know what? I was just thinking it's the day-to-day little amazing moments like that story that people don't really realize. People pay attention to officers when they shoot and kill someone, and they want to debate if it was justified or not. And it's great that system is set up, right? And to see if something can be done differently. But it's the day-to-day that I think about, especially as a crime reporter, that I see those little moments, that it's hundreds and hundreds of moments every second of every day, both good and bad, that people just don't even think about.
Yeah, I can't even tell you, like, after I was driving back to my office after the scooter incident, I felt so good. I mean, I felt like you get this feeling when you're able to help somebody in distress like that is you can't get by just doing your a routine task. I mean, it's really kind of, it's hard to describe. It's just this joy of maybe saving somebody's life that just can't really be put into words.
What would you say is the narrative not being told within the LAPD, which has such a notorious, infamous reputation? What is the narrative not known?
Well, a couple things. I think if you look at our police department in the now versus the early 90s, yeah, we've changed quite significantly. And, we all, back in the 90s, we all went through training after the riots for sensitivity training. But what really has changed is the faces of LAPD. If you look, as you hire younger people, and younger people are a little more tolerant of people that may have, a little bit different than they are. Our workforce reflects the diversity of Los Angeles much more than it did back in the 90s. So I think that's one of them. And that's really a big piece that's responsible for kind of why we're different. We are made up of close to 10,000 officers and another 3,000 civilians that are just people like everybody else. We have families, we have kids, wives, husbands, significant others, and we come to work and we try to do our very best, and we want to go home to our families. But I think the big thing is some of the stories that we talked about today. That stuff is happening day in and day out, 24/7 in the streets all over the city, where you have officers that save lives, or you have officers that are working with youth groups that are helping keeping them out of gangs, or you have gang officers that are out there patrolling the streets, and because they're out there patrolling the streets, nothing happens in the neighborhood. And that is the daily routine that really doesn't get a lot of fanfare, because it doesn't happen. It doesn't. It happens all the time. And I think every officer, when they get in that black and white and they start driving, they start patrolling in whatever neighborhood you live in the city, that officer is saying, nothing's going to happen to you, not on my watch.
Yeah, and it's a complex issue that I'm very happy to discuss as often as possible, because, with my brother's upbringing, when I remember, he still has an issue swallowing today, because he was choked out pretty aggressively when we lived in the Bay Area by an officer who almost choked him out. He's afraid of police. He's been in and out of jail his whole life. And, listen, he looks so scary. He's tattooed from head to toe. He does have a rap sheet. And I understand but he has a good heart, and he mostly hurts himself from addiction, right? And he joins a gang to be protected because of fear. And so there's two sides of this. So I understand the fear and I understand the lifestyle, but I also have a lot of officer friends, one that became an officer because his brother was gunned down by a gang member. So he's now a cop, and so it's so difficult when you have these defund police ridiculous notions. And what is it? The city of Portland now said, okay, we changed our mind. Give us $5 million to hire more cops. Well, look what you've already done. Look at the impact you've done with the whole defund police. It's ridiculous. And it's so important to talk about these tough issues, because there are some that fear, there are bad seeds, but then also I want to talk more about the hearts of officers like yours and so many people that are just such good human beings, and thank God you exist. And I wish we had more conversations like that. I wish people knew officers. I wish they had friends with officers in whatever, sector of law enforcement, to see that these are big hearts and we need them protecting us. And that's what they're doing. And just deal with the bad seeds as they come, but don't punish an entire wave of a unity because of it,
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. That's exactly, I think you painted a very good picture of law enforcement across this country in general.
What would you like to see change moving forward, just with the community, people, life, yourself?
I think, I don't necessarily I'm just speaking for Los Angeles. I think that our job is to keep on this same path that we've been on for 28 years, and just and enhance it and make it even better. And if you look at some of the work that's going on with our Community Safety Partnership Bureau, working with communities that are in gang areas, and even working with the gang members and gang interventionists, that's a model we didn't have in the early 90s. As I mentioned before when we started, our motto back then is we're going to arrest everybody and get out of this, eradicate this gang. Well, that's not going to happen. And there are people that have been in gangs that are interventionists that want to see the same thing that the community wants, that the police department wants, and that's a safe community. And I think it's really important that we keep that goal in mind, continually improve the way that we as a police department, train, and continually improve the way we work with our communities and expand it and push it to the next level.
Chief Chow, what's next for you personally? Where would you like to go next in your illustrious career?
That's entirely up to the chief of police. But I'll tell you, I love what I do, and I've got 30 years on, and I have no plans of leaving. I just, I've grown to love the city of Los Angeles. It's a very interesting place to work. I've become very connected to the many communities that I've been able to serve. And I feel like it's my second home. So I see my future as continuing to serve the LAPD and people of Los Angeles.
In such an iconic police division, the LAPD, how many movies have been made about all of you?
Really is.
I'm just curious, is there a favorite LAPD movie or show that has ever been made?
Gosh, when I told you when I was young, I watched Colors, but I realized that's not a very good representation. Either the community or LAPD. I don't know. I remember. Gosh, I can't think of. I mean, I thought like Southland kind of captured some of the things that had happened on a day-to-day basis pretty well. And I thought what was it? End of Watch, I think, captured the feeling a little bit. I mean, if you watch End of Watch and you look at the interaction between the partners, that's exactly how it is. I mean, I think a lot of cops watch that show. Well, God, they captured what goes on in the black and white, and how what officers do in the field. I mean, of course, some of it was Hollywoodized, but those two shows jump out to me. And I remember when I was a really young kid, I remember watching Hill Street Blues, and I think maybe that might have actually played an impact on me, because it wasn't like like One Adam 12 was a good show, but it's kind of sanitized. But Hill Street Blues really kind of showed like the human emotion that police officers have, and people, suspects and victims and family members. And I remember thinking, wow, that's really interesting. It shows like that, I think, that bring kind of the reality into people's living rooms, that I found really capture what the essence is of really being a police officer in Los Angeles.
Not to put you on the spot, but which is the worst one you've seen where you just roll your eyes and go, there is no way this is even remotely true?
Oh, probably Police Academy movies.
Oh, yeah.
But those are the funniest.
Yeah. I remember when we met Kelly, he put me in a bomb squad outfit. It was like 50 pounds. And he was like, go walk. I couldn't do it. I could not walk more than 10 feet. I have a photo of myself in the bomb squad outfit. It was the coolest day ever. And it's just so fascinating, that unit to me. And it's so heavy. I couldn't move. I can't even imagine officers in it trying to defuse something. But now you have robots. You have those really cool, I don't know what they're called, bots that go in and disarm a bomb with a remote, right?
Yeah, so sometimes they still have to suit up, because sometimes the robot can't get to places or things like that. But I remember, being a police officer and watching law enforcement movies is really hard, because even in shows like SWAT and some of the other ones, we have people that are maybe hired by the production companies, and they're supposed to give advice, and you can see things that happen in these movies, like especially like Speed and things like that, that that would never happen. And they say, well, yeah, but this is Hollywood and it needs to be interesting for the viewers. So it's really hard to watch a police movie when you're in law enforcement.
Yeah, because again, it's like, is it changing the narrative with these people that don't really know how it is? It's like when the forensic department says it's not CSI, we don't get the results in an hour. I don't know how many press conferences I've been to where detectives are like, this isn't CSI. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, well, we don't have shootings every day. We're, in the streets of Los Angeles, down all the way down downtown with semi-automatic weapons and things like that. So yeah, I definitely think maybe, movies and shows that kind of like glorify that stuff, because I understand that's what viewers want to see. It probably changes the narrative a little bit.
Well, Deputy Chief Blake Chow, LAPD, you are always such a pleasure, so insightful. I just love knowing you. Thanks for chatting with us. Anything else we should mention before saying goodbye?
No, I think we covered everything. It's just a very pleasure to talk to you again, Melissa and Kelly, and just, thank you for having me.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for listening. Follow Killer Jeans on Facebook and on Instagram. It's at Killer Jeans, the podcast.
Also, be sure to like and subscribe to Killer Jeans on Podcast One, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Van Mall, host of I Survived. If you enjoy I Survived, we are excited to announce a new launch. Starting November 15th, we'll be reposting our classic episodes from Season 1 of I Survived. We hope to reach a whole new audience with these important stories of survival. And for those of you who have been with us since the beginning, we think these powerful episodes warrant another listen. Starting November 15th, look out for those episodes and more news from I Survived.